Good evening, everybody, and welcome to a brand new show with the Atheist Reformation. Joining me this evening for the pilot episode of Discussions with a Theist is Elijah of the Reason and Theology channel crew. How are you doing, Elijah?
Doing well. Thank you for having me, Thomas. Really excited to do the show.
I'm glad to have you on, man. We've talked in the past. I think that it was not the Hell stream, but the one just before, like a few shows before that, when Dr. Robert Price came on there, and it
Mhm.
was you, me, Bill Albrecht, and I think Deacon Suaden on there.
Yes, we talked about Our Lady of Fatima.
Right. We talked.
Mhm.
Funny enough, we talked about that specific miracle because that's actually the topic of discussion this
Mhm.
evening, with us talking about miracles in general.
Yeah.
So, since you are the theist, you're the guest on my show, I would like you to introduce the topic, and we'll kind of see where we go from there and figure out what the real bones of contention are between the two camps, atheism and theism. But before we do that, you are a Roman Catholic, correct?
That is correct. Yes.
Okay, so after you give a brief little description of what you're wanting to discuss about miracles this evening, what I'd then like to do is, if there are any stark contrasting differences between, say, how the Roman Catholics view miracles versus other sects of even Christian belief, let alone other Abrahamic religions or other faiths,
Mhm.
what delineates RC from those others, if there is anything?
Sure. No, appreciate it. And before we start, I did want to throw something out there.
Oh,
I've said this to you before, but you are my favorite atheist, so it's a pleasure for me to be here to talk to you live. So as far as miracles, a miracle is something that is beyond nature, where nature doesn't explain how it happened. It's supernatural. Um, as far as other religions, I think other religions would probably define it the same way. The only difference would be how they scrutinize and how they question their own miracles. So, as a Roman Catholic, I know the Roman Catholic Church is very open with regards to having scientific research done on their miracles that they claim. So that they'll invite scientists that are world renowned to test their miracles. And there are times when the Catholic Church has admitted that something used to be a miracle, and after science has examined it, it is no longer considered supernatural. You can still believe it as a miracle as a Catholic, but there seems to be an explanation for it with some of them. Like, for example, with incorruptible bodies. Are you familiar with that at all? With the Catholic Church's miracles or quote unquote miracles?
The Incorruptible Bodies. You'll have to refresh my memory on that one.
Sure.
One of the running gags on here is that I used to be Catholic, but I honestly do not remember a whole heck of a lot of it.
Sure.
Unfortunately,
No
it's been a
worries.
while.
No worries. So, incorruptible body is when when a holy person, is deceased, and they bury that person, and let's say like 200 years later, they take out their coffin, and their body is still, like, their flesh is still there. Okay, so that's an incorruptible body.
Okay.
In the Catholic Church, there are cases of those where some scientists have studied some of those bodies. There's hundreds of them, and there is a few of them that is still unexplained. There's one called from Saint Zita, Zita. I believe she was from the 13th or 14th century, and her body is still intact, incorruptible. I believe that her organs are still there. And that one is unexplainable. Scientists have looked at it, and a world-renowned person who studies mummies and how they mummify bodies. He studied the body of Saint Zita, and he wasn't able to explain it. He did give an answer, and he hypothesized that it could have been um, the environment that she was in caused her body to not decay. And so that was his answer as far as he can tell. But he said there was nothing done as far as any mummifying. There was nothing, no preservation used or nothing as that sort. So, so to me, I still consider that a miracle. Now, because there was an answer, because he said that the natural environment around her could have been the reason why her body is still intact. You know, the Catholic Church has sort of backed away from considering those types of things miracles. And I bring that up because it's very important for us to know that the Catholic Church isn't interested in just calling everything a miracle. They scrutinize their own miracles. They bring scientists in, and if there's any explanation, whether it is plausible, whether it is something that is, you know, almost improbable, just the fact there is something there, they say, okay, then this may or may not be a miracle. We're not going to call it a miracle any longer. You're still open, but you're still more than happy to. They're more than happy to call it a miracle if you're a Catholic, if you want to call it a miracle. But the official stance of the Catholic Church wouldn't be that, hey, this is a miracle. So that's my first example that I wanted to bring up. And it kind of goes with your question as to how other religions look at miracle versus how the Catholic Church looks at miracles. I know there are some Protestant sects that no longer believe that miracles are possible today.
Right.
They believe that miracles ceased to exist after the first century. Once the last apostle died, there's no more miracles. So they would look at these miracles the Catholic Church claims as bogus, or you know, they're just making it up, and so they don't hold to it. Go ahead.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. So, right, I'm kind of in the boat of virtually any one of these incorruptible bodies, at least as far as I'm concerned, based on what I'm seeing with Saint Zita and things like that. There are such instances, and these happen quite often, called natural mummification, and that's entirely to do with the environment in which the body is entombed or buried, interred, however you want to call it. And for instance, there's a Buddhist monk. He's definitely dead. I mean, we can tell that he's dead. His body has desiccated, much like Saint Zita's has, and so we can tell that natural mummification has taken place. However, in Buddhist tradition, though, he's actually considered to still be alive, just to be in such a heightened state of enlightenment that his body has shut down or something to that effect. It's a little odd. So that would, I think, would also serve as a decent example for is something else that would be maybe considered a miracle or a miracle of a different fashion by another religious group that may not necessarily line up with the Roman Catholic or Protestant or whatever view. Exactly.
And that's, you're on point, and that's why I wanted to bring that up as a first miracle. I kind of wanted to set the stage here as to on the surface this seems like a miracle. It is an amazing, incredible, even as an atheist, to know that there is such thing as a body that doesn't decay, however one wants to explain it.
Well, I wouldn't say doesn't decay, or at least since she's been exhumed and reinterred in a glass coffin, she certainly has seen better days. We'll say that much.
She doesn't look like we would, right? She's brown, but her organs are still in there, and that to me is the more incredible part. Now, if you were to put a gun to my head and say, "Hey, do you think this is a miracle?" You know, I don't know if I would say yes, it is, because there seems to be some sort of natural explanation out there.
Right, and not just one natural explanation. Like, for instance, my Sunday co-host is tuning in and watching right now, and he says one body was a result of apricots in the soil created a gas, which is true. Says, but that isn't what happened to Saint Zita. Okay, says hers is a different cause or a true miracle. And so I would personally go with a different cause, because we know that there's several different ways of achieving this type of natural mummification, and usually through sheer accident more than anything else.
Right. Now, the only thing that I would question is if there was any sort of natural environment that caused her body to be the way it is, versus other bodies. We 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 should expect other bodies buried where she was buried to have the same effect. Um,
Not necessarily, because natural mummification is a pretty finicky thing. It's much like with fossilization of dinosaurs and things like that.
sure.
You find dinosaurs of the same era that are fossilized in similar areas,
Hmm.
but one will be much better preserved than the other, and that has everything to do with either soil content, what the animal ate, how much bone the animal had, whether it had already been deceased by that time and
Sure.
partially interred. All sorts of factors kind of go into that. And so, without having something that's done essentially clinically,
Hmm.
where we were to somehow find the exact method and manner in which Zeta was buried, and then do every single thing exactly the same, but with another body,
Hmm.
at that point, that gets us at least a step closer to understanding what happened and
Sure.
see if it was the soil itself or perhaps there was some natural phenomenon inside of her own body that
Hmm.
allowed herself to be better preserved
Sure.
in conjunction with soil content, soil chemistry, all sorts of things. Because one thing I studied, uh, I'm a law major now, but
Hmm.
uh, before I studied chemical and mechanical engineering. So chemistry is kind of my wheelhouse here.
Hmm.
And with that understanding, we understand how chemistry works. We understand how the components that comprise the human body work. And in large part, we understand how they work together to do certain things.
Sure.
And so we kind of understand usually how that environment is going to react to that. At least that's my personal take on it.
Hmm.
But feel free. I don't want to monopolize the whole time, even though it is my show. I genuinely want a discussion here.
Sure. No, I appreciate that, and like I said, that's why I brought that up as the first one, and I don't, I would probably um, stand side by side with you on that. That there, if there is any kind of explanation, I don't want to present that as a miracle, and say, and I think if a Catholic wants to discuss these things and say, hey, these incorruptibles, these are miracles,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they're doing themselves a favor, because you do some research, you just do a little bit more research online about this stuff, and you come to find out that, hey, that there's, you know, it's not 100% there. There's something that kind of makes it, I don't know, 95%. Even if it makes it 99%, then I think we throw it
Right.
out as not a miracle.
Right. Hang
Um,
on a second.
sure.
Sorry, I had to cough and mute the mic real quick. But no, so there's one thing I'd like to see if we can agree upon.
Hmm.
At least just you and I.
Sure.
Forget anybody else, just the two of us here.
Hmm.
Do you think we could at least agree upon the fact that if, under any circumstance, these incorruptible bodies are found to have a natural or naturalistic, natural, scientific, whatever you choose to call it,
Sure.
explanation,
Hmm.
would it not be then considered logical and reasonable to, every time we encounter one of these, we need to seek to dismiss natural causes first before touting it as a potential miracle? Would that not be agreeable?
Um, Help me understand what you mean. So, are you saying that if
Is
we
that
do
sin-
find, go ahead.
is that I think it would be logical that since we already do know of natural methods of mummification or natural
Sure.
methods by which these bodies become, as the Catholics describe, incorruptible, or slower decaying, whatever you want to call it,
Hmm.
then it would be logical to assume that if we found, say, tomorrow, uh, I don't know, we dig up somebody's backyard and either their long dead ancestor or their pet parakeet from 5 years ago, whatever,
Sure.
is is in pristine condition
Hmm.
or pristine condition aside from the fact that they're dead,
Yep.
that it would be logical and reasonable to assume that there's most likely some natural component here that is influencing this versus a supernatural one.
Yes.
and that at the very least we should seek to verify that there's nothing we can find naturally that really explains it before going further.
Yes, I would agree with that.
Okay, okay.
Yep.
So, we're already starting off better than a lot of people would in this discussion, I think.
Sure. That's good. That's good.
All right, so let's keep it rolling. Let's keep it rolling. So, if you're done talking about this one, we can move on to the next one, or
Yeah.
if you want to keep talking about this, we can. However you want
No,
to do it.
let's move on to the next one. So this next one, I believe that there is some miracle here that happened, and that is the apparition of Our Lady of Guadalupe.
Okay.
Yeah. So, are you familiar at all with that story or that miracle apparition?
Uh, that was one that we discussed that was similar to Our Lady of Fatima, wasn't it?
Yeah. So it's a Marian apparition. It happened in
Right.
the 16th century, and where Our Lady of Fatima happened in the 20th century, early 20th century.
Mm-hmm.
This one, what's amazing about this one, is that we still have the evidence for the miracle today, after 500 years.
And what evidence is that? Just for
Sure.
anyone who's not already either steeped in the doctrine of Roman Catholicism or
Mhm.
is crazy like someone like me or you or anybody else on RNT that researches this stuff for fun.
Yes, absolutely. So it's this gentleman named Saint Juan Diego, who was it's in Mexico. The
Mm-hmm.
miracle happened in Mexico, and he had Mary appear to him in December, in winter, and I'm just going to summarize it. I don't want to get into the details of it.
No,
People
it's
can
okay.
obviously look it up. But she told him to go pick flowers in the field. And then he said, how can there be flowers now? It's December. It's the middle of winter. There's no flowers. Basically, she said, trust me. And he goes and he finds flowers and he collects them on his shirt. So if you can imagine, he put the flowers on his shirt and he rolled up his shirt so that he can carry them. And she told him to go take these flowers to the bishop as a sign of that I appeared to you, okay,
Mm-hmm.
as an apparition. So he goes to the bishop, and as the bishop opens his door, the Saint Juan Diego drops the flowers on the floor for him, as Mary instructed him, and on his shirt, what appeared was an image of Mary, where she appeared to him, the way she looked. It's called Our Lady of Guadalupe. And if anybody's listening, or if you're sitting on your computer right now, Google Our Lady of Guadalupe image, and you can look up the picture. And what you see online is what appeared on his shirt from the flowers that painted it, so to speak. Okay, and so what's still evident for us, as far as evidence goes, is you can go to Mexico today, and that same shirt 500 years ago is still up on display for
Mm-hmm.
anybody to see. And that's not not the most incredible thing about it. There's a lot of things about the shirt that scientists have studied. I believe they call it a tilma.
Mm-hmm.
They studied it. The preservation of it is incredible. There haven't been any preservations done to keep it preserved. And there's a physicist named Dr. Aldolfo Orozco, and he studied it. There's other ones who've studied it, and they said that this should have decayed or have been lost as far as the image goes on the shirt uh, after a decade
Mm-hmm.
maximum. It's been here for almost 500 years now. I think it was, I want to say like 490 years, around there, 489 years that we've had it. And they've actually recreated it using similar material that the shirt had. And they tried to recreate the image on there. And after 10 years, it was gone. But the real one is still here after almost 500 years. On
Mm-hmm.
top of that, as well, is they've studied the the material used to draw that picture, and they are completely baffled as to what it was. It wasn't any paint. It wasn't like it's nothing that we've ever seen in nature. The scientists cannot explain what that is, like what these the material, like let's say somebody draws a picture, you know it's from a pencil, or you know it's from color pencils, or a pen, or paint brushes. We can look at that and we can explain that. With this miracle, they can't even explain what this material is that caused these colors and this image to appear. In addition to that as well, the way that the stars were aligned on the picture, you'll see stars, was perfectly aligned with the stars in the sky on the day that she appeared to him. And in addition to that as well is something incredible about the eyes. If you look at the eyes of the lady in the picture, they have used computer technology to zoom in to the eyes, and you can see them. And what they found is what she saw when she appeared from her own eyes. You can see Juan Diego kneeling in front of her if the eyes are zoomed in using computer technology. So what she saw, and that's not something that an artist can draw it's a very small, obviously, space for an artist to draw something like that. So that's the miracle, and I believe this is something that was miraculous, especially since we can go to Mexico today and see it's still there, and scientists cannot explain how it's still there and it shouldn't be there.
Okay. So it says for like the first 100 some odd years, it was just hanging there, and so that is supposedly part of what is the miracle, some protection from damage and whatnot.
Well, like I said, they tried to recreate something similar to it, and 10 years later, it was gone, and they put it in the same type of environment, because they're not trying to prove the miracle here. They're trying to see how they can explain this. These are scientists. These are not Catholics that are trying to explain this miracle using natural means, and they're baffled as to how it's still here. And like I said, they can't even explain the coloring of it, from where it comes from. There's an actual documentary on this that people can look up that will explain all the science behind it, how much it was scrutinized, and they were left kind of wondering what this is. They couldn't really explain it at the end.
Right. I'm wondering just to what degree that was actually feasible, because like depending on which source you look at, like when we're talking about the ophthalmologist looking at the eyes, what's supposed to be the Purkinje effect.
Sure.
And so it's saying that but images of all the witnesses present when the Tilma was first revealed before Zumarraga in the 1500s, and also says a small family group of mother, father, and a group of children in the center of the Virgin's eyes, 14 people in all. But there's other sources where it says there's 31 human figures in the image.
Sure.
And that these were seen, this comes from Tonsman himself, after filtering and processing the digitized images of the eyes to eliminate noise and enhance them. So,
sure.
Looking at all that, I mean, from one source, and these are both supposed to be quoting Dr. Tonsman in this. One says 14, another one says 31, and if the Purkinje effect is a tripling of images, then obviously 31 is not triple of 14. So you'd have to have a higher number of that. So to me, that kind of, I don't know, that sets things up for, I don't know, maybe the potential for something like pareidolia.
Sure, and I'll be honest with you, Thomas, is the whole I thing,
Uh
the
huh.
whole I thing, that to me is the weakest part of the miracle. So
Right.
if someone wants to say there's nothing there, for me, I'm not gonna. That's not the kind of hill that I'm gonna die on. There, that's
Well,
it,
it's, and the reason why I say it kind of sounds like pareidolia
sure.
is because it's a natural thing. Like, you know, I'm not trying to be dismissive on this one, but when people say they found, Abraham Lincoln's head in a cornflake, or they saw Elvis's face in toast, or Jesus's face in toast, those are instances of pareidolia, in which case there is this stain or pattern that appears, and we look for it, and we have the tendency to see faces and things like that. That's part of the reason why Rorschach tests are considered actually quite accurate in helping to determine, at least preliminarily, mental illness in people by not having these effects take place when they should.
So are you saying that the image itself is pareidolia, or are you saying the eyes what was found?
No, no, not the image itself. The image
Okay,
itself is pretty clear. It's a pretty clear portrait of
I
of
see.
Mary, but no, the images in the eyes is what I'm talking about.
Sure,
Is sure when looking at it,
sure.
some of the shapes, some of the blobs in there look like they could be human-like or have
Hmm.
slightly human characteristics.
Hmm.
But again, that's where I run into that whole thinking it's probably pareidolia, because even then, that's after enhancing, filtering, processing images, and zooming in some 2,500 times.
Hmm.
I'd be willing to bet that we could probably take some other, I would just say a canvas painting from around the same time,
Hmm.
and zoom in to that arbitrarily massive amount, and probably run into some of the same issues,
Sure,
especially if we ran into the same filters and enhancements that Dr. Tonsman did.
sure.
And so,
Absolutely.
to me, that just seems kind of, it seems a little hinky, if you don't mind my saying.
Sure. And like I said, that to me is the weakest part of the miracle. I still believe there's something there, but if someone wants to disagree with me, I can completely understand where they're coming from.
Right.
And the reason why I say I still think there's something there is because I don't think that pareidolia was an explanation used by these people that looked into it, who are very smart individuals, and this is their field of study. And so pareidolia would have been something they could have just said that, that this is what it is.
Well, but still, I don't know. I still have a couple of issues with that,
Sure.
and the reason why is because, like, I kind of have questions about Jose Tonsman,
Hmm.
because they talk about him having a PhD in engineering,
Hmm.
but in other articles he's described as an ophthalmologist.
Sure.
So, and I can't seem to find any record of him ever actually having a practice
Sure.
as an ophthalmologist. So, uh, again, at least on the images in the eyes,
Hmm.
this seems to me a lot like, at least to some degree, like Dan Brown's Bible code.
Sure. Sure.
And again, I'm not trying to be dismissive when I say that.
Sure.
It's just that, you know you have to go through all of these seemingly arbitrary levels of zooming, filtering, processing of the images and things like that to get
Hmm.
to the point where they say, "Oh, this is X number of people."
Right.
Just like with Dan Brown and his analysis of biblical text, where, oh, it's got to be laid out a certain way. We've got to look at it in this particular grid pattern. You've got to squeeze the goat's testicles just this particular way while looking out the east window at midnight
Sure.
and holding your tongue towards the moon, to see what they're claiming to see in this kind of thing.
Understandable. Like I said, if somebody wants to disagree with me there, I completely understand where they're coming from in that specific part of the miracle.
Right. Now, as far as the rest
Sure.
of it,
Hmm.
looking at the image itself,
Hmm.
you have to pardon me so I can cough for another moment.
No worries. Hopefully you don't have the coronavirus.
Oh yeah, no,
Yeah,
no, nothing like that.
that's good. Thank God.
It's just where I live in Texas, we've had some massive just humidity fluxes up, down, left, right, and
Oh,
sideways.
sure.
Same thing with temperature. And so there's a couple people that ended up with basically a mild upper respiratory infection.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
Yeah. And so I've just got, a little bit of chest congestion and some coughing. Nothing
Okay.
crazy.
That's good. Nothing serious. That's good. I'm actually in the heating and cooling business, so that humidity and temperatures is all I know, and I'm talking about miracles here.
Right. Hey, I'm a number cruncher for a call center, so we do these kinds of things as a hobby. And if people choose to listen to us and enjoy it, I do this to not inform in some grand academic lecturing kind of way, but
Hmm.
more of just to approach things from a lay perspective
Sure.
and, try to garner some understanding of some of these more complex topics
Hmm.
and maybe distill it down to where someone who may not decide to go into the academic field of studying all this stuff ad
Right.
nauseum
Sure.
and understand it, enjoy it, be entertained by it, whatever they may choose as far as that goes.
Hmm.
So, in looking at the image itself, looking
Hmm.
at the cloak, as far as I can tell here, is there doesn't seem to be a lot of real up close images of this dadgum thing, in all honesty.
Hmm.
Like there's reproductions that you get real up close images of, but not the thing itself. And so to me that kind of messes with me a little bit. Not saying that that makes me skeptical that it's real or
Sure.
or anything like that. It's more along the lines of it makes me wonder to what degree has this thing been tested. Now, I mean, this thing has been behind safety glass to be as well preserved as possible. So it's not uncommon for something like that to last several centuries at that point. Now, after the first 115 years, whatever that claim was,
Hmm.
okay, I'm with you. It's possible that something like this could very well have rotted away, but there are a few things that seem to be working in its favor, such as okay, despite the fact that it should have been, you know, exposed to soot, incense,
Hmm.
perhaps the odd candle wax, and the replicas they say normally endure for only 15 years before degrading.
Hmm.
Now they also claim that it has repaired itself with somehow no external assistance in the late 18th century in an accident in which nitric acid was spilled on it.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know the documentation on that one doesn't
Hmm.
really there doesn't seem to be a lot of it, and
Sure.
what there is, it seems to be there doesn't seem to really be any witnesses of it, just what one or two people are saying.
Sure.
And
I wasn't
so,
even aware of that part of it, but yeah, that's not something that I was that I've looked into, but sounds interesting.
right.
I'll say that much. Yeah.
Then they also talk about now this one's coming from Wikipedia.
Hmm.
November 14th in 1921, a bomb hidden in a basket of flowers and
Hmm.
left under the tilma by an anti-Catholic secularist exploded and damaged the altar of the basilica that houses the original image, but the tilma was unharmed.
Yeah.
A brass standing crucifix bent by the explosion is now preserved at the Shrine's Museum, is believed to be miraculous by devotees.
Hmm.
I don't know about that being miraculous in and of itself,
Sure.
but uh,
Yeah. See,
uh,
see, to me, that has some that could have some sort of natural explanation, and to me, I don't kind of want to say, hey, that was a miracle. But going back to what you were saying,
right,
as
the
far as
image itself, the canvas itself.
Yeah.
You know, we do have other canvases of seemingly similar quality, at least based on what I can tell. Oh, Harry's asking if we can see an image. So let me see if I can pull that up right quick. I'm just
Yeah,
going to
I
pull up
recommend
Google image
typing in
search.
Our Lady of Guadalupe real image, so you don't find like the replicas, just the actual image
I
that's in the.
I think I found a good one
Okay,
because it's got Pope Francis touching it.
I don't know if that's the one. I saw that one too, but
Let's
let's
see.
look at the one
That's
that's
the
hanging up. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
yeah. This one looks like this is from Vatican News. So
Hmm.
let me check the new tab and whatnot.
Okay.
No, it says Pope Francis prays before Our Lady of Guadalupe. So this is yeah. Supposedly he visited on Guadalupe's feast day.
Okay. So this is
So
the real one.
this is supposed to be the real deal.
Okay. Okay. That's good to know. So,
To the
um,
best of my knowledge, this is supposed to be the real deal. Now, I'll say this right now with a heavy ass grain of salt the size of Kansas. If somebody can tell me that this is not the right one, and then they can supply me with a better one, or a more close up image, or some kind of white paper or something like that, send
no, I
it.
think you're
I'm
right.
happy to discuss it.
No, this is the right one. Because
Okay.
I looked at the one that's hanging in Mexico,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the same exact one with the same frame and everything. So, this is the one. And if you want to look at the one that's hanging in Mexico, it has like gold things surrounding it. The color There's a color gold around it. And if you type in Our Lady of Guadalupe real image, you'll see what I'm talking about. There's going to be a bunch of them there, and it's
Okay.
the same one that you have pulled up.
Right, so there's this one from Snopes, and it looks like someone may have gotten a closer up picture.
Hmm.
Uh, Here's this one looks like a replica to me because this is in a completely different frame and a completely different area. Because you actually see this here too.
There it is, right there.
This is the right one, so this is the
This
one.
this is the one that's hanging up in Mexico. That's what you would see if you were to go there.
Okay, so then I guess the one with the Pope was one that was when it was taken down. Yeah, you can see where this is something that's been taken down into a vault. You can see the mechanisms here for
Hmm.
moving and transporting it. So this
Right.
is the icon itself, just
Hmm.
in what looks to be a storage area or a private viewing area versus
Yep.
in the basilica where it's normally
Yep.
housed. Yeah,
Yes.
you can see the framing around it inside of these.
Yes.
It
Yes.
actually looks like you look in that top left hand side, that actually looks like hinges right there. So it very well could be that this is just the other side of that wall. Because you look at
Yeah.
the wall structure right there, it looks as though that this is actually the viewing area where they just pull this out and ratchet it into there.
Yes.
So this looks like this is just a private viewing right behind where it normally sits in the
Sure.
basilica.
Right. Yeah. It
So
says.
that's kind of cool. I mean, I enjoy that for the sheer engineering ingenuity of it
Sure.
personally.
Makes sense. Yeah, going back to, I kind of want to touch up on
Yeah, no, please.
the preservation of this image. Is you had mentioned that it had things going in its favor, but again, I go back to the ones that looked at it, who
Mm-hmm.
are scientists and renowned, and they could have said that as well. They could have said, that there are things that are going to their favor. They just couldn't explain how it lasted or has lasted 500 years. What I would recommend, Thomas, if you ever have the time, I know it's a 54-minute documentary. It's on YouTube. It's free. Anybody who wants to watch it, you just type in Our Lady of Guadalupe documentary, amazing scientific analysis.
Okay.
They go into
I
great
will
detail.
link that down below
Sure.
after the show's over and
Okay.
whatnot. And so, depending on uh, which direction it takes, I might go through and look at it.
Sure. Yeah. Please do, and see if it's something that you think is beneficial for people, in your show to watch. I encourage you to post that. It's very scientific,
Mm-hmm.
and it scrutinizes it, and tries to find reasons behind it.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a few years since I've watched it, so I don't really remember what they conclude at the end, I just remember being in awe, listening and watching it, as to like all these things that they just couldn't explain about it. Regardless of the eye thing, but just the preservation of it is
Right, right.
incredible.
No, the
Even people that are
preservation of it
religious.
is I mean, if this is the exact same thing
Mm-hmm.
from back in the 15th
1500.
century, excuse me,
Yeah.
1500s, if this is indeed the same thing,
Mm-hmm.
yes, it's remarkably well preserved. I will happily hand it that.
Sure.
Um, so I
Sure.
would like to find out exactly what this thing is made of more
Yeah.
than anything else.
So
I
so
would
do the
like to know what
scientists.
the actual canvas is made of.
Yes. Yeah. There are some um explanations as to what the canvas is. Like they know what that is made of, but the actual image is what they're baffled by, as far as the colors
Right,
and
there's
things like
supposed
that.
to be something along the lines of I think there was someone who stated that it appeared to be synthetic,
Hmm.
the dyes or colors or whatever.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So if you wanna move on, we can move on to something else. I mean, we can do a whole show on this, on this very apparition. There's just so
We
much out
probably
there.
could.
Yeah, there's so much out there. Um, but if you want to move on, I do have other ones that I kind of want to bring up. If you don't mind, if you have anything else to say about this one, feel free. It is
Uh,
your thing.
I would say that this is something that is interesting. Now, I'll full disclosure. This is something that I found on Huffington Post,
Sure.
which this is not something I usually go for.
Hmm.
Um, the only reason I'm going for it is this appears to be this is coming from a PhD contributor and named R. Andrew Chestnut, and
Hmm.
he is the Bishop Walter F. Sullivan Chair in Catholic Studies
Hmm.
and Professor of Religious Studies at Virginia Commonwealth University. So that's the only reason why I'm okay with even mentioning HuffPost in this,
Sure.
because it appears to be written by someone who would be considered an authority on a topic such as this.
Hmm.
So, um, it's entitled "The Virgin of Guadalupe: 10 Fascinating Facts." Um, not going to go through all of them. I'm going to go through number 3, which is
Okay.
kind of interesting.
Hmm.
And it says, despite his recent canonization, there's actually no hard historical evidence that Saint Juan Diego ever really existed.
Sure.
In fact, at the time of the controversial canonization process, the abbot of the basilica, Guillermo Schulenberg, resigned in 1996, claiming that Juan Diego had never existed and is only a symbol. The Nahua peasant was canonized nonetheless as a part of a strategy to retain indigenous Catholics who may have been defecting in droves to Protestantism, especially Pentecostalism, which there was kind of a Pentecostal boom in Mexico in the 90s, if I remember
Hmm.
correct.
Yes. Yep. After Vatican II, that did happen. Even if that's so, I mean, I do believe that he existed,
Mm-hmm.
and I take that by faith. Um, but even if we were to say he didn't exist, the miracle isn't so much Juan Diego. It's what we have in front of us that we can observe and scrutinize and try to study and see
Mm-hmm.
what it is. And if we can't explain it, to me, that kind of adds to the fact that he existed, because this thing is here. And where did it come from? The records show that this story is what was passed on. Um, you
Right,
know,
but there again, we also have the instance of, I hate to bring it up, but another pretty famous piece of burlap,
mhm.
the Shroud of Turin,
Yes.
which has been debunked as being what it is claimed to be several times, even going back to the
Actually,
late 1980s, even
yeah.
considering the fact that I want to say it was either the 14th or 15th century, there was a monk who went and viewed this
Hmm.
and came back stating that this is an exquisite forgery.
Are you talking about the shroud, or the? I'm assuming the Shroud of Turin is what you're.
Yes, the Shroud of
Okay.
Turin. Not
Are,
not talking about this, talking about specifically the Shroud of Turin,
sure.
just because it's another famous piece of what's considered low quality canvas that
Hmm.
appears to have that has an image impressed upon it, so to speak.
Yeah. As far as the shroud goes, I know there's been some debunks that have been debunked, if that makes sense.
Well,
Um,
the ones that haven't been are the blood spatter pattern analysis from
mhm.
the 80s, which said that that the way the image is on there would not be consistent with um, a human body, and
Mhm.
the way they lay, where they're located at, is not consistent with where they would be on a human torso.
Sure. There
That one
is
has not been refuted yet.
right. There's a website on the shroud. It's called shroud.com, and the Shroud of Turin to me, I think is very remarkable. And I don't know if you're aware, but Reason and Theology are going to have a renowned scholar on the Shroud of Turin come on. I believe I want to say it's first week of April sometime. But if
Okay.
people are interested, it's reasonandtheology.com. He would be the one to go. He's the one of the go-to guys there on it. But shroud.com, you can find all the scientific research that have been done on the shroud itself. There is a team that usually they're allowed to look into it, and you can look it up by year, and it's archived all in here and what they've
Mm-hmm.
discovered. There's a lot of things that I'm not sure about the whole blood spatter. This is
Mm-hmm.
not something that I've looked into too much, but I do know that there are things, for example, before they used to believe that this is a forgery because they found that it was from, I don't know, the 11th or 12th century, right? That's where the carbon
Right.
dating
The
goes.
the fabric itself was not old enough.
Yes, yes. And then they did, and then they had found out that it had burnt, and so that was a sewed part of the shroud that
Mm-hmm.
they sewed on there, in order to make it look more appealing. And there is a renowned scholar on it who is actually Jewish. He's not even a believer of Christ or of Christianity or anything of that sort, and he believes that this shroud is of a person named Jesus of Nazareth from the first century. He believes it, but he doesn't believe in Jesus as the Messiah.
Mm-hmm.
He's just coming from a scientific standpoint from it. And he's been on Catholic Answers several times on Catholic.com radio talking about it. So if anybody's interested in watching him, he's actually one of uh, the scientists on Shroud.com that you can look up his stuff. It,
Mm-hmm.
it is very fascinating, Thomas. I encourage you to go on there and do some research on that as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know about the blood spatter. Honestly, it's not something that I've heard of or can explain or have an answer for.
Okay. Right. Now, yeah, so looking at everything, the new research is in line with previous studies that have concluded the shroud is not authentic. Earlier carbon dating work has determined that it dates to 1260 to 1390. Uh, a blue ribbon panel called the Turin Commission concluded in 1979 that stains on the garment are likely pigments, not blood, while textile experts and art historians have suggested the materials and images are not from the right era. Also, as early as 1390, about 35 or so years after the shroud first emerged in France, the Catholic bishop in Troyes, Pierre d'Arcy, hopefully I pronounced that correctly, wrote to Pope Clement VII that the shroud was a clever sleight of hand by someone falsely declaring that this was the actual shroud in which Jesus was enfolded in the tomb to attract the multitude so that money might cunningly be wrung from them.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems as though that even the Catholics of the day decried this as a propagandist forgery with which to essentially fleece a congregation.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I encourage you to go on that show and kind of
Mm-hmm.
on the live questions, ask questions to that scholar. I'm sure he's heard it all.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure he's heard these questions. But like I said, he's probably on that same team as the person that I mentioned, the Jewish
Possibly,
person.
possibly.
Yeah. and they've looked into it. I would think that he's a believer in it as far as the person coming on the show. I believe he's Christian, if not Catholic. But that's something to go to him. I wasn't even going to bring the Shroud of Turin because I don't know much about it. It's
Right.
been a while since I've looked into it, but I do remember coming out of the research that I did on it. It was like 8, 9 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
That there seems to be something there. I didn't make the leap of faith and say, "Hey, this is a miracle."
Right.
But to me, I was like, "Man, there is something there," but I left it at that, and I didn't really do any more research since then.
Right, and the whole reason why I brought up the Shroud of Turin is because it so I'm not going to say it very closely aligns with the Tilma of Guadalupe, but there are some correlations between the two, and so it seemed like a reasonable thing to bring up. For instance, one thing I would encourage you to look into,
Mhm.
at least on the Shroud of Turin aspect, is a man by the name of Matteo Borini.
Matteo Borini. Okay.
Yes, Borrini. He is actually part of the most recent study. He's a forensic scientist at Liverpool John Moores University in England. He worked on the most recent study done for the Journal of Forensic Science.
Mhm.
Um, and he is a Roman Catholic.
Mhm.
He said the original idea of this test was to show the potential of forensic sciences applied outside of a crime scene. So this was his message to his students to see the potential of a multidisciplinary approach in that forensic science could be applied to archaeology in certain circumstances.
Sure. Yeah, that's
Um,
fascinating. I would love to bring that up to the gentleman that's going to be on the show at Reason and
Absolutely.
Theology. Yeah, that's very fascinating because that is very recent in 2018.
Mm-hmm.
I know there was a gentleman named Stephen Jones who did write a blog on his critique on
Mm-hmm.
Borini, and I haven't read it myself. I'm just googling this, and then as you're telling me the name, I came up with this article here, this blog post. But this is definitely something that Catholics should look into. And you know, the Shroud of Turin isn't so much. It's not the same level of miracle claim as the Our Lady of Guadalupe.
Mm-hmm.
And you're absolutely right that it is something that you should bring up because they are on similar grounds as far as the category. It's an image on some cloth, right?
Right. Exactly. And that's my
Yeah,
only real correlation between the two.
exactly.
But again, we come to the issue of where even some Catholics, especially one that was a PhD in a chair of a department that wrote for HuffPost, in that there's no real evidence that state that Juan Diego ever existed as a person. And sure,
Sure.
we have this piece of cloth that has this image on it that has been preserved for seemingly a very long time, but just because we have the cloth does not mean we have the man.
Right. Right.
And so I would, to me, that in a lot of ways kind of acts as a point against it being a miracle. Now, granted, it could very well be a miracle where this cloth just appeared on the doorstep of this church um, all those many years ago, and they thought that that was just too outlandish and made up the story of Juan Diego.
Hmm.
That's a possibility. I don't see it as a plausibility,
Sure.
but I'm willing to entertain something like that as okay, this is a potential vein of thought that could need to be explored. And so I really just think more testing is needed to be done of the canvas itself. Like for instance, if it is supposedly self-healing, like say, then I would think that the church that houses it would not be very or should not be very against, say, a uh, an art forensics team perhaps cutting a swatch off from somewhere, not maybe of the main face, but just somewhere where there is both fabric and this ink, dye, paint, whatever it is,
Hmm.
and take it for analysis. and then we should be able to see, okay, is that canvas going to heal itself, and what is going to be the result of this forensic analysis? Because it seems as though it doesn't, that there actually hasn't been much real deep diving forensic analysis of the dies itself. At least nothing after the mid 20th century or so. And in all honesty, that could be some concern because, like, for instance, nowadays, when we do authentication testing for some of these earlier works, these early paintings from famous artists and things like that, such as verifying a Rembrandt, we have the benefit of this canvas being able to be framed, and so we can take this canvas, this painting, out of the frame and essentially cut off a chunk of it that would normally be hidden by the frame and test that.
Sure.
Because there is no, from what I've learned, there's really nothing aside from some degree of destructive testing to actually determine what this is made of, what its quality is, what the qualities of the paints are, that kind of thing.
Sure.
But anyway, we can go ahead. Yeah, Harry was coming up and saying there was a priest when the Shroud of Turin came out that wrote stating it was a forgery designed to make money on parishioners. Yes, that was correct. I did bring that up. So let's go ahead and move on to the next one you wanted to talk about.
Absolutely. And as you were talking, William Albrecht messaged me here because this isn't something that I was aware of, the claim that he never existed.
Mm-hmm.
And he brought up something called the Escalada.
The Escalada?
Yeah, it's a codex called the Escalada. It's Codex Escalada that gives evidence of his existence. But again, I don't know much about it. That's just something that he brought up with me here, and
Okay.
people are free to bring that up. But I do want to move on to something else because we are coming close to the hour. We have 3 minutes, but obviously we can go above that.
Right. I'm happy to go as long as you are willing.
Sure.
So
No problem.
it's entirely up to you. You're coming on. You're a guest of mine. It's called Discussions with a Theist. So as long as you're willing to discuss, I'm willing to have you on.
I appreciate that, Thomas. Thank you so much. So another miracle that I wanted to bring up here, and before I move on, I just wanted to say about the the dye and all that stuff. That documentary does a great job of explaining the science behind it, and there's a lot more than I think that you're looking into here and what websites you're looking at. But that documentary, it just, to me, it baffled me. It was just amazing when I was listening.
I will take a look at the documentary. I promise you, I will look at that documentary and see what I can find out. Now, with William bringing up the Codex Escalada, I actually did a quick little search for it.
Sure.
And it's not any great thing as far as I can tell. It's a single sheet of parchment that has been drawn on in ink, and it's from the Nahua region, but it's dated as 1548. So at the very least, this is nearly 20 years after this supposed occurrence. And so I don't know.
That's not too bad. That's not too bad.
No, I mean, it's still contemporary to the event. I will grant it that.
Yeah.
It's within 20 years, at 17 to be exact. So it is contemporary to the time, but that seems to be pretty much it. And in all honesty, it's a drawing on parchment. And so this kind of brings me back to the possibility of what I've come to know as the Liberty Valance effect. Have you ever heard of a movie called The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance?
I have not.
Okay, so it's an old black and white Western. It's starring John Wayne and Jimmy Stewart. John Wayne plays the famous outlaw Liberty Valance, who is supposedly shot and killed by Jimmy Stewart's character.
Hmm.
And Jimmy Stewart is regaling this tale to his biographer, who has been publishing this biography and this story in a series of news articles as he has interviewed him. And when it gets near the end, when it gets to the end of the movie, Jimmy Stewart's character comes out and reveals whole cloth that he did not shoot Liberty Valance,
Hmm.
that he had next to nothing to do with taking down this outlaw.
Sure.
And at that moment, his biographer stands up and tears up his notes and throws them. And he asks, "Why aren't you going to print that?" And he says, "Because, sir, when the legend becomes fact, you print the legend."
Hmm.
And so I wonder if that could be something going on with the Codex Escalada. You know, this is the story that's been told for the last nearly 20 years up to this point.
Hmm.
So it seems to me, it stands to reason that this very well could just be a continuation of the legend of Juan Diego.
Sure. Sure. I
But
mean,
anyway,
yeah,
moving along. I found that and thought it was interesting, and so wanted to go ahead and get that out there and just kind of bring that up to you since this was new to both of us.
absolutely. Absolutely. I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, the next thing I wanted to bring up is Eucharistic miracles. Um, and this is completely different than Marian apparition miracles, obviously. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there is another one that I wanted to bring up, but I think we need to move on from Marian apparitions.
Right.
Our Lady of Lords was the other one, but that could be a topic for another day. But miracles with regards to the Eucharist are when the priest is saying Mass and he says the words of consecration,
Mm-hmm.
where he says, "This is my body," and the bread literally turns into flesh.
Mm-hmm.
And when he says, "This is my blood," the blood turns into literal blood, or I should say, what appears to be wine turns into blood, literal and
Right.
physical blood. So, and there have been hundreds of these miracles throughout uh, throughout the centuries. The most famous one is a miracle of Lanciano. It dates back to the 8th century AD.
Mm-hmm.
And what's amazing about that one as well is that you can go to Italy and you can see it today. It's still on display.
Right.
The flesh and the blood is still there, and it is something that has also been studied by scientists, um, and they have concluded several things about it. They concluded that it is real flesh and it is real blood. They've concluded that it does belong to a human species, and it's a muscular tissue of the heart, is what they
Right.
conclude.
Yeah, I think I found an article on this. An anatomy professor by the name of Odoardo Linoli
Mhm.
uh, conducted an analysis of it in 1971 and concluded that the flesh was cardiac tissue. The blood appeared to be fresh blood as opposed to blood that was 1,200 years old, and that there were no trace of preservatives.
Mhm.
Um, so I can accept that that's what he concluded from this. However, this kind of comes down to the fact of this has been something that has been moved, manipulated. It's been in several different possessions over the course of 1,200 years.
Mhm.
So I would like to see this. I would love to see if whether or not this anatomy professor actually published a paper about this. That way we could actually go through and see, you know, because it's not just enough to do a scientific study on something. You have to actually analyze the method by which the study was done.
Yeah. Yep.
Because, you know, as with all things, at least in science, one of the things that we seek to eliminate at all costs is cognitive, implicit, and even unconscious biases as much as possible. That's like with medical testing or testing of medications. We do double and triple blind studies where, in some instances, not even the doctors know who's receiving a placebo, who's receiving the actual medication
Sure.
to to as closely as possible eliminate any bias, so that
Right.
the real result can be obtained. So I would like to see what this guy's methodology was, because if this is entirely on board, even with it being as far back as 1971,
Mhm.
that would be an incredible thing to find out is actually true.
Right. Yeah, I remember reading the paper because I remember having a debate with a Protestant on when I used to be on the Catholic Answers message forum.
Mm-hmm.
I remember having a debate with a Protestant. So I've done some research on this, and I've read the actual research paper. It is out there. If you do a little bit of digging, you can
Mm-hmm.
find it. And yeah, everything that you're reading there is what he concluded. And that's to me again. I'm bringing this up as a miracle.
Mm-hmm.
But let me ask you, Thomas, if you don't mind, has there ever been any miraculous claim from, I mean, it doesn't have to be the Catholic Church, but from any theist standpoint, to where you step back and say, maybe there is something there. Not that you made that leap of faith,
Mm-hmm.
but has there ever been anything of sort?
Well, from a personal standpoint, no,
Mhm.
I don't think
Okay.
I've experienced anything that did not have some kind of natural explanation, or an explanation that was may not have been readily available at the time, but was easily obtainable later on.
Mhm.
Like for instance, I remember hearing about, and this was actually uh, during my church going days, if I remember right.
Mhm.
There was this supposed miracle happening where these people walking up and touching this tree and praying in front of it, and even on a cloudless, sunny day,
Mhm.
they would feel droplets of water hit them on the back of the neck and the head, and
Mhm.
they felt that they were the tears of Mary, or the tears of God,
Sure.
being cried upon them from the tree, um, for the offering of their prayer.
Mhm.
And at first I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. This this is something worth looking at.
Mhm.
Maybe not something worth accepting right out of the gate, but it's
Sure.
definitely something worth looking at. And then come to find out, it turns out that this particular tree had this massive infestation of a bug that eats parts of the tree and then excretes
Sure.
essentially water.
Okay.
And so,
Yeah, I mean, I hope what
later,
I'm presenting is a little bit better than that.
say what?
I said I hope what I'm presenting here is a little bit
Yes,
better than that.
what you've presented thus far
Sure.
is definitely, I would say, worth a harder look than
Sure.
say this was. But there again, it requires a harder look,
Yep.
because we have one thing in all of these instances that was not there
Right.
with this crying tree, and
Sure.
that's time.
Yeah.
That is time for a story to be told, a time for a legend to develop. Um, and so that's why, to me, in a lot of ways, I I look at pardon me, and this is, again, this is not to be dismissive, but I look at a few things in a couple of particular ways.
Mhm.
I look at religious claims, especially going back to, several centuries ago and things like that,
Mhm.
and religion in a similar way that I would look and analyze, say, a comic book of today, in that it it seems to be kind of a modern mythology of sorts. And I know a lot of people don't like the fact that I use the term mythology for it, but aside from the fact that there are adherents to the religion who accept everything in the religious text as true,
Mhm.
there's not there's not enough difference from just a pure analytical standpoint between Abrahamic religions,
Mhm.
even let's say Jainism, Buddhism, comic books, and things like Greek and Norse mythology.
Mhm.
Because at the time when legends, when those myths were penned and written down and orally transmitted, they were believed. They were believed in much the same way as people believe in God or Jesus or Yahweh or Allah. They were believed in much the same way. And so I feel at the very least justified in not necessarily comparing them as the same thing, but in using some of the same analytical techniques on all of them. Like, for instance, I think one of the famous things going around these days is that, okay, 1,000 years from now, we could unearth someplace uh, and find a comic book, and we know that in 1,000 years from now, we know that New York City existed, and the comic book depicts New York City and things happening in New York City, but
Hmm.
that doesn't get us any closer to demonstrating that Spider-Man exists
Right.
or Iron Man or insert anyone here.
Sure.
And so I think that's something kind of running around the debate track right now. Um, but it is an interesting thing to think about as
Sure.
far as that goes. And that's where my mind kind of goes
Hmm.
in looking at these miracles.
Hmm.
This is to me like the the Tilma of Guadalupe.
Hmm.
Is this actually what it is? Was there a Juan Diego and that all of this happened?
Hmm.
Or could it possibly be more likely that there's another explanation of this Tilma of Guadalupe is part of a story, part of a local legend?
Well, I mean, to me, I would say that regardless of the story, even if you were to throw the stories out,
Mm-hmm.
what I'm presenting are the physical evidence left behind that have been scrutinized,
Right,
and
but the
not
stories
necessarily.
themselves are important.
Sure, absolutely, and to me, I believe the stories happen, and I believe I don't know if there's any doubt about the Lanciano, the historical records. But as an atheist, I would hope that you appreciate the Catholic Church is open to scrutiny as far as, hey, scientists come and scrutinize these, look them up and do some research,
Mm-hmm.
and please tell us if you can explain this.
I,
Because they
I,
don't have to do that. That they
right,
could just
no,
treat it as a
they
miracle.
don't, they don't,
Yeah.
and I agree with you on that note. But also, what I agree with them on is the fact that as far as Catholicism has been as of late, it has
Hmm.
been more open to openly acknowledging certain scientific theories that are and have been very well established,
Hmm.
and just accepting those
Yeah.
despite even backlash from their own congregations.
Sure.
Um, biggest example I can think of off the top of my head is evolution, because it's something I
Hmm.
spend a lot of time talking to different people about.
Sure.
Because in large part, your average individual doesn't understand it.
Hmm.
They really don't. They think evolution is like what you see in X-Men.
Hmm.
And I don't necessarily fault them specifically for it. I fault our education system more often than not for that. But that's an entire show or three or five all on its own. Uh,
For a
but
semester. Yeah.
right, but yes, I can appreciate that um, certain parts of the Catholic diocese are open to having some scientific analysis done on things that they purport as miracles and
Right.
allow those things to be tested. Now, personally, I if you still have a copy of that paper from uh, the Miracle of Lanciano,
Sure. I'll send
Professor
it to you.
Linoles, if you have it,
Yes.
and I'm not able to find it, I would love to get a copy of that because I would like to look at it.
Absolutely.
Also, I think that okay, this was something done in 1971. I
Hmm.
think it'd be really cool if they were open to, say, allowing another analysis to be done now with
Sure.
even greater technological and scientific advancements since even 1971. There are even more answers that we could glean from something like that.
Yes, I agree with you there. And
I mean, with as
Sure.
good as modern genetic analysis is nowadays, I'm pretty sure they could take a sample, break it down if it's still fresh or whatever it is, um, and possibly tell you where this individual was from,
Hmm.
or if if it was ever actually part of a human body.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because I think there is a Eucharistic miracle where that did happen because it was more recent. That's why I would be interested in seeing this one studied in
Hmm.
more modern times. Now, I think in 1970, 1971, they had enough technology to know that this is something that shouldn't be here. It shouldn't be preserved
Right, with
after
what we
1,200
knew at
years.
that time. But again, with a sen- but again, you still have. This is also 1971. This is shortly after the moon landing. We're
Hmm.
still using slide rules, and the only computers are the size of a building.
Right.
So there's not really any genomic sequencing happening on something like that. Whereas nowadays, we could do that in a couple of days.
Sure. Now, the fact that it is real flesh and it is real blood and it
Hmm.
is fresh. If we just stop there, what I'm saying is from 1970, that is something that they could know from that. Even if they had enough technology, and remember that this is something that they opened up again in 1981.
Hmm.
So it wasn't just one time where they looked at this miracle, but in 1981 they did reopen it and they discovered the same thing. I believe um, the scientist's name was Linoli. I want to say his last name is Linoli, Linoli.
Right,
Um,
that's the professor from 1971 who did the
yes,
initial
the same
analysis.
one.
Yeah.
Exactly. So he opened it up again, and that's the one that I read the paper from. And I'll send it to you if you can't find it. I'll send it to you. But that kind of harkens to the other Eucharistic miracle that I had in mind.
Hmm.
Um, it happened in Argentina in the 1990s. And so there's no doubt about this one having real people there and that existed because there are people that it's modern times, right? So
Are you talking about the miracle of Chirataconam?
no, this one is in Buenos Aires in Argentina under Bergoglio, Bishop Bergoglio, who was now Pope Francis. So at the time when he was Archbishop of Buenos Aires, this miracle happened under his bishopric in his diocese. Um,
Okay.
this one is incredible to me, and there is a YouTube um, talk on there. If you Google this miracle on YouTube or YouTube it, there is a scientist who gives an explanation as to what happened. Not so much to explain it away, but he's describing the miracle and what happened.
Right, right.
What was amazing to me, and I'd have to go back and listen again, but from what I recall, what he discovered was is he had this flesh in his um, I guess in his hands, not literally in his hands, but he's one of the scientists who was studying it, and he took it to a lab, and he told the lab to tell him what this is, and he did not tell them any backstories. He did not tell them anything. Is that this is a Eucharist miracle? These people have no idea what they're looking at. Besides, what they're looking at is just a piece of flesh. And
Hmm.
so they scrutinized it, they looked at it, and they came back and said to him, what we discovered is that it is a flesh from a heart who has a person who has been severely beaten,
Okay.
and who's gone through a lot of stress, physical beating and stress. And the person then said something that I still remember from the video. It's still on, you can find it on YouTube. He said, "But tell me one thing: is how is it possible that when I was looking at this under a microscope, the heart was still beating?" That's what he told him. And to me,
Hmm.
uh, this is more modern times, and this is after the 90s when they were looking at it. So to me, that is a more incredible Eucharistic miracle than the Lanciano one, as incredible as it is to me, the Lanciano one, because it has been here for so long and it's still there. This one, it was so detailed as to what that scientist discovered in that lab, and he didn't know what he was looking at. He was baffled. Um, so, and again, this is another thing that I encourage people to look at. What I'm doing here, I'm not so much proving these miracles. Anything I'm presenting, I'm kind of giving the 101 education of it, right?
Right, right.
And that's I'm not a scientist. I don't you know, the last topic that I claim to know is science. As you know, you've come to me and hey, let's do a show on evolution. I have no idea about this stuff. That's not my expertise. Evolutionism and all this stuff. I hated I hated science back in high school.
Right.
And
Well, and
college.
that's one of the reasons why I would like to have you on for something like that is to
Sure,
approach this from a truly lay perspective, because I do have a pretty good understanding of it,
sure,
and I honestly think that, you know, given enough time, we could go through a discussion, and if, for instance, say you did not accept evolution,
sure,
that we could, the two of us, whether live in private, however you wanted to have that discussion, get to a point where, regardless of what your religious or philosophical beliefs are, acknowledge that evolution is actually a true and accurate representation of reality as pertains to biology and just
sure.
life on this planet.
Sure. And you know,
And it,
I would be interested in doing something like that where you're sort of educating me on the topic, and I would be more than happy to be open to listening. Because I'll be honest with you,
mhm.
I don't know enough about evolution to say I believe in evolution.
And that's fine.
Yeah,
That's fine. I'm a firm proponent of you should not accept anything as as you knowing something, or you accepting something as fact
sure,
or as true without having first studied and understood it.
absolutely,
Like, for
absolutely.
instance, that's why I am remaining skeptical with things like these Eucharistic miracles,
Hmm.
Lady of Guadalupe, and so on,
Hmm.
because as of right now, I don't have enough information to
Sure,
make a truly educated decision as to whether or not I would accept this as one thing or another.
sure.
And that's kind of how I try to keep this show
Hmm.
overall. Is it's not necessarily about changing minds, it's more about exchanging ideas and bashing them up against each other, throwing them against the wall, throwing them in a pressure cooker, and steaming them into oblivion, and seeing what we can wring out of them and
Absolutely.
agree upon.
Sure. Makes
And that's the
sense.
whole purpose of it.
Sure.
Um, so, um, I think we pretty much covered everything. If you want to continue talking, I'm happy to. Otherwise, we can go ahead and call it here if you have other things you need to do. And I obviously would love to have you back on again sometime,
Sure.
and you know, maybe on camera so we can show the world your beautiful face or
Sure.
your ugly mug, whatever you want to call it,
It was an ugly one. Yeah.
and see how that goes.
Sure.
Or we can keep it largely anonymous. It doesn't bother me one way or the other.
No, next time I'll get on camera. I just need to remember to charge my phone because I had to plug it in here. I've been on camera on Reason and Theology. I have no problem showing my
Oh,
face.
okay, okay.
Yeah, yeah,
I didn't know about that. Every time we had the chance to interact, I
sure.
guess you'd either had to charge your phone or you didn't have a decent enough camera setup, or something was going on at the time, and so all
Yes.
we had was the little icon that you were joining with. But
The
no,
very first time that you were on with me, that was the first time I did a show ever on live YouTube. So
really,
to
I
me,
didn't know
yeah,
that.
yeah, that was the first time. So
Huh.
I wanted to kind of get comfortable, and you know, when you show your face, for me, I get a little uncomfortable. But now
Yeah,
I'm more used to it, and I'm okay showing my face. But and every time I do, um, halfway through the show, there seems to be some sort of issue
technical
with the
difficulty.
microphone. Exactly. So I turn it off halfway through, but I
Yeah.
don't mind showing my face. Next time
Oh,
I'll do that. I'd love to do a part two because I had other things, but I think we should
yeah, no,
kind
we
of put
should
a
definitely do a
pause
part
here.
two. I would like
Sure,
to have it. I would like to have like a couple other shows kind of in between, and
sure.
just kind of break them out, because that'll give not only us time to kind of have other discussions in between Miracles Part
Hmm.
One, Part Two, part 50,842nd, which however far we have to go with this.
Sure.
And it gives us time to study each other's position, study our own positions,
Yep.
and the information that we present to each other, as well as have other interactions in between where we
Sure.
discuss other topics to get not only a better feel for each other as discussers or interlocutors, whatever you want to call it,
Right.
and just have a greater understanding of each other as we go through this process of give and take, of educating each other on these different topics.
Agreed. Absolutely. So we'll talk on. We usually talk on Messenger, and I heard your Messenger go off because we're in the
Yes.
same group chat, and I'm
Yeah,
like,
I
oh,
forgot
we're getting
about that, and I had to mute that sucker as quick as I could on that one.
No worries, no worries. So, hey, I appreciate you having me on. I had a blast. This was very fun for me, and looking forward to doing more shows with you, Thomas.
Awesome. It sounds great. And to all 4 people who are watching right now, or 5 I saw a minute ago, thank you all for tuning in to a Saturday evening with the Atheist Reformation with Elijah of Reason and Theology. And tonight we discuss miracles. There'll be better description down in the description box down below after the show is over. But until next time, we're going to have Elijah on hopefully very soon again. Let's see, next week is 321, so we're going to have Mike Lofton on. And tomorrow we have our standard Sunday service show at noon with Harry Taylor. And later on that evening, I believe, I'm having a kind of an impromptu discussion with Deacon Joseph Suwaden of Orthodoxy. So we'll see how that goes. And hopefully everything goes well with that as well. So again, thank you all for tuning in. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Check out Reason and Theology. I will try to remember to link their YouTube channel down below, even though they're much bigger than I am. But hey, credit where credit's due.
For sure.
Go check out more of Elijah's stuff and see what you think about it. Until next time, thanks for tuning in. Have a great night, everybody.